Okay, Jam, I want you to picture this.
Okay.
You have a piece of gum in your mouth, and then you put some chocolate in there.
I remember that.
Okay, well, actually picture something different.
Okay.
You just had a big holiday meal, and you ate with your family, and everything was so delicious, but you have a little bit of garlic breath.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that.
But it's not time for dessert yet because you're just too full, like no pumpkin pie yet.
Right.
So instead, you reach for a piece of gum, and then as you're chewing, you wonder, what am I chewing on?
That is such an interesting question that I actually have wondered this past week.
What? No, you haven't.
I have, because this got advertised to me, this other like natural gum. Have you heard about this?
No.
Okay. It's probably, I don't know. No, I don't want to say anything about it. Other than the fact that it made me think, oh, I guess if that's natural gum, what, quote unquote, natural gum. I'm like, what is other gum then?
What is unnatural gum?
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, how exciting.
Yeah. And you want something else?
Tell me.
I don't like gum.
I don't love it either.
Nice.
I'm kind of a mint girl.
Yes, me too. I love mints. I'm a mint boy, but
It's like when people are like mint girlies, you can
Yeah.
be like a mint girly even though you're a boy.
Yeah,
You know?
kinda like
it's like
whenever
part
we
of the
did-
gang.
kind of like whenever we did our Fit Girl Spring. Was it Fit Girl Spring?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I'll be a mint girly. I am particular about when, like, the formats of mint and stuff like that. But yeah,
What's your favorite kind? I actually have some mints in my backpack right now.
Nice. I really love Altoids.
Oh, I don't have Altoids in here.
It's okay. I mean, I kind of like all kinds, but what I mean about format is I really want mints, but I don't want mint things. Does that make sense?
I'm going to do this nice crinkle.
Nice.
ASMR.
Very nice crinkle.
One of the wintergreen lifesaver mints is what I have in here. And then also these breath saver mints.
Nice. I love Altoids because they're just so strong.
Yeah.
And they pack a punch without being very small.
But you don't like mint ice cream is what you mean.
Correct.
Yeah,
I
that's fair.
other things being mint. But I want mints to be mint.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I have also been wondering about what is gum.
Okay.
And also what happens to gum once you spit it out.
Mm-hmm.
And, what's the best way to get it unstuck from something.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about the chemistry of what gum is. We're going to talk about a really innovative company that takes used gum and does something with it.
Whoa.
I know. And we're going to talk about just like all of the exciting things of and relating to gum. The digestion, the rumor that it takes 7 years in your gut to digest. We're going to unpack all of it.
Okay.
And we're going to, next week in our re-release, revisit the time when you did a chemistry experiment at home with gum and chocolate.
I remember that very, very well.
Yeah, it was kind of burned in your mind.
Yes. Very odd.
Okay, great. Well, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Hey, I'm Melissa.
I'm Jam.
And I'm a chemist.
And I'm not.
And welcome to Chemistry for Your Life.
The podcast to help you understand the chemistry of your everyday life.
And I want to, point out my Christmas chemistry sweatshirt.
Chemistry for your life.
Christmas chemistry for your life sweatshirt. We have a new updated version of this. So, go and check it out.
It is new as of last year.
Yes.
So it may be the one you have, but if you have this one from the first year of our podcast, or you've never had a chemistry for your life Christmas holiday sweater, then this is a great one.
Yes. I actually was thinking of updating it to the new one.
I think I might also. I almost did last year, and I think we got close enough to the actual holiday where I was like, oh, I won't get to wear it that much before.
Yeah.
So then I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So I think I should.
Yeah. And didn't one of your children want one?
Yes.
Yeah. So that'd be fun.
Yeah. And you know what actually stopped me is I think as we were getting closer to the day, They also were out of a color
Yeah.
that I wanted.
So you couldn't match him.
Yes, that's what it was.
That is what it was.
So anyway, it's time. Let's try again.
It's time. Let's do it. So get your Christmas sweaters. I also want to dedicate this episode to the newest member of our community, Julie S.
Julie S.
Welcome to the gang, Julie S.
Yes, thanks for joining our chem community. And as a way of saying thank you for supporting the show, you get an ad-free feed of the show.
Mm-hmm.
You get a thank you. You get this episode dedicated to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you get access to some behind the scenes stuff, and we are grateful for you.
And a shout out at the end of every episode.
That's right.
And handwritten thank you notes. We do those like about once a semester to all of our new members who have joined. So sometimes we will do surprise mails for holidays or just different things like that. So it's so nice to have you. I believe Julius maybe is part of the Dispersionaries, which is a cool name, I think.
Yes.
Kind of like mercenaries.
Yeah, it is.
I also want to shout out my student. I don't think I can say her name because of FERPA, but she knows who she is. So lately, I just started teaching at a university, and I've been working really long hours to catch up. And it's just not as I won't normally work this much, but it's kind of like being back in school as a student. My cousin also just started as a professor, and she said it's like having a 10-page book report every day that you have to present in front of the whole class and no time to do it. And that is a really good characteristic of how it feels. So I've been
What does your cousin profess?
History, I think, but I don't know what kind of history.
Yeah.
She's the other Dr. Collini. There's at least 3 of us in the academic sphere.
Dude, that's so cool.
Yeah, the whole of our cousin generation.
Can you imagine just like there being somebody who happens to be at one of the schools where one of y'all teaches and maybe transfers to another?
I know.
And just happens to be like, Collini, that's, wow, interesting.
Well, I don't think it'd be hard. Because
it's not that common of a last name in my experience.
Yeah.
You know, I've only known people related to you with that last name.
That's true. Well, she teaches in Arlington and I teach in Denton, so it's not like too far away.
That's really not.
I know.
I've known multiple people who have done, like, I kind of had either one of those schools in their like plan, or even has transferred between them when they've kind of changed their major or something.
There you go. And I will say that happened when I worked at Auburn. Like all the education research people from the different divisions got together. And I said my name, and then somebody else said something that like made it very clear that she would have had to work with Renee, like coastal climate resilience. You know, like those words. I'm like, I know those words in that order. They only come from Renee, coastal community climate resiliency. You know, and sure enough, that person was like, I was wondering about you with your last name.
Yeah,
I was like, yep.
But their last name and the curly hair, and your sister's hair is curly too, right?
Yeah, well, it's gotten curlier as we've gotten older. So this is a big deviation. So back to
everyday chemistry. And what could be more everyday than gum?
Well, and every day then the student who has taken to sitting and studying at the tables outside my office. So I will be studying all day and she will be studying all day. And it's kind of like she's become my study buddy.
Nice.
And she listens to the podcast. So shout out to her. And I don't remember if she suggested it or if I thought of it first. I don't remember who thought of the chemistry of gum first, but I said it in her. I remember her face lighting up when this idea came out.
Nice.
She's like, that's a great idea. And I was like, okay. So that was part of the what came this episode in my mind. But it is kind of difficult because there are a lot of little details that are like industry secrets about gum. But I can give you a good overview and the basic idea of the chemistry of gum.
Okay.
So are you ready?
I'm very ready. Let's do it.
I think this is fun. Okay, so I bet you can guess that there's sugar and flavor.
Yes.
In gum.
Right.
Plus, there is a gum base. And those are sort of the 3 main things: sugar, flavor, and gum base. Okay. So obviously, I bet you could guess the sugar and flavor, you know, like different, like mint oil or things like that give it its flavor. But what is gum base? Well, when we chew gum, we're actually usually chewing on a glob of polymers.
Whoa. Probably could have guessed that if I thought for a second longer. that it seems very polymery, doesn't
Yeah, it does.
Hmm.
And we did our whole episode on rubber.
Right.
And I'm
And we did that one about silicon too.
Silicon, yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm betting that the person who told you about this natural gum, it's because they all those polymers would be coming from natural sources like a rubber tree.
Mm-hmm.
But the rate at which we consume gum in modern day, natural sources would be tapped out very quickly. So we instead have synthetic polymers often that make up our gum base. So, but there are approved by the FDA more than 40 different polymers. Some are natural, like from the rubber tree, and some are synthetic that are made from the same basic building blocks as plastic. And so, and we've talked about this before, but I always like to review what polymers are. So polymers are these repeating, so we call them, they are large molecules made up of a bunch of small molecules.
Right.
And I like to say they're sort of like if you had like a pearl necklace. So you have these beads that repeat over and over and over again. And each of the individual beads, that's like what we call a monomer. It's one unit. And once you get the unit repeating over and over again into a long chain, that's a polymer.
Mm-hmm.
So the bead is a monomer. The long chain is a polymer. And then we can take polymers one step further, as these individual chains can sometimes interlink with one another or be attracted to one another with intermolecular forces, basically like the, attractive forces between molecules. And so they can sometimes be these like long chains that are all intertangled together. And I think the best episode we've ever had where we talked about that in detail was probably the one about eggs. And we used the analogy of like the cords when you like have lights at Christmas time and you pull them out and they're like all in one. Yes. I think about that all the time because that is really good. So like if you had like holiday lights, and each individual repeating bulb, it makes this long chain, and that long chain is the polymer. And then polymers can get linked in with other polymers, making a mass that's very hard to disentangle. Okay, so there are properties of polymer, and we've talked about so many polymers. So things that absorbs liquid in diapers is polymers. Gum now we know is polymers. Protein is polymers. They're polymers made up of repeating units called amino acids. There's just so many polymers everywhere. And they can be really different. Just because they're polymers doesn't mean they're like inherently terrible or great. Plastics polymers, proteins polymers, there's so many polymers everywhere.
Right.
But they can have really different properties depending on what is the bead of the necklace. What are those monomers that repeat over and over? How long of a chain it is. So like the length of the necklace. And then how much is it intertwined with the other necklaces or in our holiday cords, how many other holiday cords are intertwined and how complex is the knot. So let's talk about those features and then how those things impact gum.
Okay.
So gum can stretch and be blown, but then still ultimately come back to its, original form, because the polymers in gum have some cross-linking. These polymers are often called elastomers. So polymers that can stretch and return to their original shape. The chemical name for that is elastomer. And they are typically amorphous polymers. So just they don't have a strong repeating structure. They're not like solid crystalline.
Okay.
But they do have some linking mixed in. So it's like if you have a little bit of tangle between your different holiday cords. Not the huge mass that it's like this is one giant ball, but like the kind where when you pick something up, the other ones try to come with it. And if you let it go, it'll go back into it.
Right.
A little bit of entanglement, not a lot of entanglement.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
And we did talk about that with rubber when we did our episode on like what is rubber. And we talked about how tires have those cross links are like really like firmed up into actual bonds. But then when rubber is sort of in its natural state and you have like the rubber bouncy balls, those are like more of the lightly cross-linked. So same thing here with gum is you have light cross-linking that allows it the flexibility to move, but it ultimately comes back to its original shape.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, and I did want to point out that Jim is currently enjoying the treat that he earned on our episode with Claire. It just took me a while to get it to him.
I mean, you did attempt to at one point.
But I didn't know what flavor
I didn't
it was.
get back to you in time.
Yes.
To tell you what I wanted. So anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
For remembering and for being very determined to get this to me.
You're welcome. Okay. So that's the first thing. So the cross-linking between allows the polymers to stretch and come back together.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing, why it doesn't dissolve is because, the quote unquote beads in the necklace, the repeating unit over and over are not polar.
Okay.
And we've talked about the difference between polar and non-polar before, but essentially if electrons are shared equally around a whole molecule, not atom, a whole molecule, then the overall thing is kind of neutral.
Okay.
But if you have a higher concentration of electrons in one area than another, sort of like a game of tug of war, if one's better at pulling electrons towards itself, you'll get poles where one side is negative and the other side is positive.
Right.
And we've talked about that sort of like magnets have poles, And if you bring two negative sides together of a magnet, they repel each other or whatever.
Right.
Those poles mean that you can have stronger intermolecular forces and intermolecular forces easily with other things that already have poles. But if you have no poles, if all your electrons are kind of equally shared, you're less likely to interact with other things with poles, and you're more likely to interact with other things that are non-polar.
Right.
And we see that in like the interaction between water and oil. If you put oil in water, it beads up and doesn't want to interact with the water because oil's non-polar. Its electrons are evenly shared around all the molecules, where water is very polar. The oxygen's really negative and the two H's are really positive. So they don't want to interact.
Right.
So the repeating units in the polymer of gum are not polar.
Okay.
And that means that they don't want to interact with the water in our saliva, which our saliva is mostly made up of, so it doesn't dissolve in our mouth when we chew it. Instead, it stays intact, sort of impervious to the effects of saliva not dissolving the way that you might expect other food to dissolve that is able to interact with the water.
Right.
Sort of just stays intact. So those two chemical identities or properties, I guess, of gum are what give gum its quintessential, it chews and chews and chews and doesn't ever lose its shape and doesn't ever dissolve.
Right. Okay.
But that means that if you do interact this with something non-polar, like, for example, the fats in chocolate, the long chains of non-polar molecules in gum will start to separate out from one another.
Okay.
They start to interact with and be dissolved by the fats like they did in your experience at the time.
Yes.
It's funny to me that this is so burned in your mind because that was like one time, probably in like 2020, that you chewed gum and chocolate together.
Yeah, I remember already. It must have been 21, I think, which doesn't make a huge difference there. But like, it was a little bit later in our chemistry at home experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember all those pretty well, actually, I would say.
So that means everyone at home needs to do the same experiment so that they remember this. Well, I guess you didn't remember the chemistry that went with it.
Right. And I mean, I think if you had made me like really dig into my brain, I probably would have at least been able to do the polar non-polar part.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that part sounds very familiar.
Yep.
And why the chocolate changed the equation, in the way that like soap does,
Yep.
That part kind of felt familiar, and I think I could have gotten that far. But we did those like very brief explanations with those.
I clicked on it to try to find out when it was. I researched it. It was April 2021. Good job. Good memory. So yes, that means that if you, not just chocolate has some fat in there, but also like butter or peanut butter would all ultimately do the same thing.
Okay.
It would ultimately dissolve and what we mean by dissolve, what happens when something dissolves is typically it's completely surrounded by the molecules of a solvent. So you can think of the strands of the polymer being sort of wrapped up in the nonpolar molecules of the fats in all of those things.
Okay.
So your saliva can't do it, can't break it down. But as soon as we introduce something else nonpolar, it will start to interact with the gum in a way that your saliva can't, because your saliva and the gum is like oil and water.
Right.
Okay. And so then the last question is then, and then I'll answer some other things, is then how do we get that flavor in there, and why does the flavor eventually go away? Do you have a guess about it?
I mean, my guess would be something to the effect of that maybe it's like, okay, here, how about this? So in order to have something have a flavor to it,
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be where our tongues can actually taste it,
Mm-hmm.
which requires it to be able to like, I guess, be like, understood by our tongue and interacted with by our tongues, which would mean it may not be able to be nonpolar.
Okay.
And so it would be able to slowly dissolve maybe over time.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's not a way around that. Or even if it is nonpolar, maybe it needs to be able to like come out.
Yeah.
Or something so that we can actually taste it. Because I guess there's a lot of things we eat that are both polar and nonpolar that we can taste all of those things, right?
Yeah.
But it needs to be that we can actually get little pieces of whatever it is, little tiny bits of it into our tongue so that we can taste it.
Yeah.
There's no way it could be quite as sort of resilient of a polymer as the main gum part.
Yep.
Is that something there?
That's very close. Yes. So essentially the flavor molecules and sugar for sure are more easy to interact with water. So they can interact with and ultimately be dissolved by the water in our saliva and therefore spread over our tongue. We get the flavor of them, and then they're swallowed ultimately, which means that they are eventually completely removed from the gum. So the gum loses its flavor quite literally by having the saliva in our mouths dissolve the flavor out of it sort of like gets in there, and you can't interact with the polymer, but it can take anything that's polar that it can interact with out of the polymer base. So the polymer is almost like a little cage that's holding these flavor molecules, and then your saliva will get in there and try to then get them out.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yes, definitely. Wow, interesting. And I guess like it would be the same for a sugar-free gum. You're using a non-sugar sweetener that still needs to be able to be like accessed by our saliva and blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Wow. Interesting.
So when you say it's like, oh, this gum has lost its flavor, it has literally lost its flavor.
Man. And if it's lost its flavor, how could it become flavorful again? You know?
Is that like the salt loses its saltiness thing?
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's see, if it loses its flavor. Oh, there are people whose whole jobs is to try to, it's like companies that all they're doing is trying to make the best gum base possible. And they can change the polymer mix ever so slightly so that it'll hold on to the flavor longer. And like, there's all these things that if we mix those 40 polymers, like, oh, we take these 3 of them in this way, then it's really good at like bubble yum type blowing bubble gum versus this type is going to be good for breath freshening versus this type is going to be good for like the nicotine gum, you know? So there's these things that are like slightly different depending on what you want out of the gum. And so there's like whole chemists whose job is just to work with gum.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So do you want to try to explain the chemistry of gum back to me? And then I'll give you fun facts about how to get it out of your hair, what happens with gum once you're done with it, and and then we'll do a little category related to gum.
Yes, I'd love to. Okay, so let's think of... So with gum, the whole point is we want it to not be gone fast.
Right.
Regardless of the flavor situation. It's like the whole point is to have something that we want to chew on it, which is actually kind of why I don't like it. I don't really want to just be chewing on something.
Yeah, it kind of starts to make my jaw tired.
Yes, and there's nothing grosser in my mind than chewing on something that's flavorless. So like, I get the draw of like some minty gum for like 5 minutes, you know?
And there is also, there are studies that say that athletes who inhale menthol while they're exercising, that it enhances their exercise experience.
Wow.
Like they report feeling less fatigued and all kinds of things.
Interesting.
So there's more than just the draw of the flavor.
Wow. Okay.
I forgot to write that down and I meant to. Okay, carry on.
So the whole point is, okay, what can we have that we can actually chew on and it not just fall apart immediately?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the opposite of what we're trying to do with all food, you know?
Yeah.
It's like we want to be able to break down the food and like ingest it and break it apart into the things our body needs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what could we make that wouldn't do that? And even though some things we do eat are polymers, if we could get a polymer that is non-polar, so that it doesn't really want to like mix with the water in our mouths, our saliva, and has one that has lower cross-linking.
Yep.
Still has some, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that structure would be working is you've got the like beads of a necklace kind of thing, and then places where it literally links to other beads of necklaces.
Yeah,
basically.
like I think of like a little, when two necklaces just twist together. They're not like a full knot, but they're sort of twisted together.
Yeah.
So they can come apart, but you have to put some energy into taking them apart,
right. And because it's low, it lets our teeth actually chew it, and it has give to it, and it can blow into a bubble, it can stretch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But go back to its tangledness, into its gum shape.
Yeah, like galvanized rubber, I think that's what it's called, like for tires, that makes tires. That has the cross links that are, they're not just vulcanized. Yeah. What's galvanized?
Yeah, galvanized is, I think, something they do to metal. I don't know what it is,
though. Okay, vulcanized rubber. We talked about how it's not just like attractive forces, but true bonds then form between that. And that's why you can't just like chew down on that type of rubber in the same way you can on gum, is because it's much more like stuck together in like a permanent way, as opposed to like gum has some sticking together, but it's like more flexible.
Yeah. The flavor and sweetness part would be that in order for us to be tasting something, they have to have added it in. These polymers are making probably don't just taste great on their own.
Yeah.
Very interesting and very strange if they did. Maybe a little worrying. But so they need those flavors and sweetness or whatever needs to be possible for our like saliva to access it and dissolve it in a way that we can taste.
Yep.
So they kind of lock it in to the little kind of chambers knit within the polymer, tangled up in there. So as we're chewing it and kind of like moving around the necklace beads that are tangled together, little pieces of the sugar or non-sugar sweetener and flavor and whatever else they put in there can actually be pulled out by our saliva.
Yeah.
And we can taste it, and it slowly just goes away to where after a long enough time it is
yeah,
actually gone.
Yes.
and then you have a gross, flavorless, goopy polymer thing
Glob of polymer.
Yeah.
I think one source I had called it a glob of polymer, and I was like, that is the grossest thing, but it's so accurate. It really is a glob.
You know what's crazy is that I want to show you that advertisement if I can find it later to that natural gum. The only thing I thought that was kind of interesting about it, that it was like, oh, if I saw this in the store, I would like buy a couple pieces. Like, I'm not going to go order it from some website or whatever, especially not just like off a social media platform or whatever I was advertised to. But it's just that it was, the way they were showing the process was literally just like taking some sap from something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was like, oh, this is just the old school kind of polymer that you let it, sit, and it kind of, I guess some of the water in it kind of evaporates out and it gets kind of harder, and then you kind of like gnaw on it. And I was like, that'd be interesting to see, like, oh, these are probably the roots of gum. It
is, and there is a really interesting article that I'll link to in our show notes that talks about the roots of gum.
Nice.
Like, it does start with like across all types of ancient civilizations, like the Mayans, I think, the like maybe Greeks. There's like, oh, the Greeks use this and Mayans use this, and even in Mexico, there's I think the Mexican word for gum is chicle, maybe. I don't remember, but. So there's like even like a tree that produces sap that's very similar to rubber in Mexico, but it is not possible for us to consume. It's like bad for the environment if we were to consume the rate of natural gum that we do with synthetic gum. So synthetic gum really like sort of helped relieve the demand on the environment for all of these chewable polymers from those trees, the saps of trees, but those are still included, like latex. We also had an episode where we talked about that. Those things are still included in the list of like more than 40 different gum bases, and those things are usually incorporated in gum base as well.
Okay.
So yes, I bet that's true. So okay, so this brings us really well. Our glob of polymers brings us well to Gumdrop Limited, which makes Gumtech. These are polymers. These are plastic materials like dog bowls. There's they recently partnered with Adidas, I think, for like soles of your shoes. There a lot of them are bright pink things, combs, like different things like that that are made with recycled gum.
Oh my gosh.
20% at least has to be recycled gum, but 100% of their products are made from recycled things. And in the UK, you may have seen this for our listeners in the UK, they have these bright pink bins, Gumtech bins. They're very bright pink, and they're like, oh, you just put your gum in these bins. They look like this. We could probably just like maybe put a picture of this up on our YouTube video, or you can Google Gumtech bins, and that bin plus all the gum inside it is recycled. And that is how they sort of, it's like, oh, let's concentrate down this glob of polymers that could be used for something else instead of causing problems in the environment, because it is very hard to break down. You can break it down like with oil into its component parts so that it's not one glob of polymer, but the polymers would still exist. And so they take that and repurpose those individual things to make all kinds of other stuff.
That is insane. That's like,
I know.
Just one of those, like someone's really using 100% of their brain thinking.
I know.
All these little pieces of polymer getting just like stuck under tables and thrown out windows and stuff like that. Like, what if we could do something with it?
Yep.
It's like, it's polymer. We could probably do something.
Yep.
And that, man, how smart.
I know. I think that's so smart.
Yeah.
And then to answer the question of how do you get gum out of your hair, the best thing is to use an oil like peanut butter, chocolate. Then you have to wash your hair, but that's fine because those things are washable, whereas the gum glob is not.
Right.
I do think I had gum stuck in my hair at one point. I have a distinct memory of my mom having to cut it out and the curl being attached to the gum.
Oh, yeah. Man.
Okay. And then we had also talked about, this is actually a listener question from Mason, who I practice episodes on.
Nice.
He asked it about does it really take 7 years for our bodies to digest gum?
Uh-huh.
And our bodies actually never digest the gum. If you think about digestion, it's chewing, swallowing, your like enzymes in your stomach break things down, then you pass it through.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that can't be digested just goes out with everything else, which is what fiber is.
Right.
And so gum, if you swallow it, acts like fiber, where chewing obviously doesn't break it down, but neither do a lot of the enzymes in our bodies. So it sort of just passes through our system undigested.
Right. Yeah, but the idea, I remember hearing that, and I remember my dad, both my parents have worked in different roles in medicine. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was like, there's no way something would just stay in your digestive system. Like, that'd be a pretty big problem, probably.
Yeah.
Like, this probably like would cause a lot of problems. If there was something we could eat that like was just readily available and we were told to chew it, knowing there's a risk of swallowing it,
Yeah.
and it could stay in your GI tract in some way for 7 years.
Yeah.
There probably some lawsuits going on. Like, probably some people who are having serious side effects from that.
I bet it was like people
clogging
are
up
like,
and stuff.
You can't digest this, and children turned it into, so it must stay there for forever.
Yeah, or it was like one person, one grown up, one time said the 7 years thing so that kids wouldn't swallow it. Which probably is smart to say. At least you shouldn't just be swallowing your gum all the time. That's probably safer to not do. But where that white lie gets made up in pursuit of a somewhat good piece of advice, and then it gets carried on forever. Like the don't swim after you eat thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's like not based in fact at all, and yet for some reason
it's passed down.
It won't die. Yeah.
Well, so that's it. That's our episode on the chemistry of gum. But I did want to ask if you have any like gum related memories that stick in your brain.
Whenever I was in 4th grade, my friend Ben and I were, I don't know where my 4th grade teacher got this idea, but she would do things where, like, my friend Ben and I were always like doodling and like making up little cartoon characters and like doing silly things. And on one hand, that could distract us from our assignments and also other kids around us.
Of course.
But what she did with several different kids that showed some level of like, I don't know what you'd call it. Creativity, but also maybe a bit of a difficulty of like
troublemaking. Yeah,
not troublemaking, but maybe like distracted by their own creativity, if that makes sense. So she let us like kind of pick some projects that we get to work on together. And we would go out in the hall, and Ben and I were to work on this project. We got like a little bit of time every week to go do this kind of thing. And it really was like we are going to present it to the class kind of thing. It wasn't just like, I got to get these kids out of here. And so we had this thing at the end of the year where it was like, or maybe it was like the end of that semester or something, but where me and my friend Ben and the other kids that had done the same thing that my teacher had kind of given different projects to, we presented them. And we did a few, like it was mostly writing and drawing kind of stuff. Like we redrew some weird illustrations to go with this weird poem we wrote or a silly story. And one of them was not very original, but was fun for us as little 4th graders to do, was to take the idea of do you give a mouse a cookie kind of concept, those types of stories, which there's like a ton of already. Well, I don't think we knew that. I think we only knew of the one.
Yeah, I think some of them started to come out as we were getting older. Yeah.
So in 4th grade, I think we only knew give a mouse a cookie. So we did one that was like, if you give something some bubble gum. And I can't remember what the animal was. I'm sure it was like a chipmunk or something that like,
that's so
like
cute.
A rodent of some sort that kind of has teeth and stuff would make sense. Gopher or a prairie dog or something like that. So we wrote a whole poem for that.
That's so cute.
And then what we did during the like presentation of it, when we were, we said the poem, we had asked my teacher if her name was Miss Timms. Shout out Miss Timms. We had asked her if we could like hand out gum or give out gum in some way. Because they like, oh, we're gonna tell this poem talking about gum over and over. People probably want gum. So my mom had bought some bubble gum, and so after we finished the poem, we started tossing the gum to the audience, and Miss Timms got this just like wide-eyed look on her face, and I just thought like, oh, we got permission to do this. In her mind, she's like, don't be throwing gum out, like gum, especially like the
little pellets.
Yes, those little like cylinders.
She gave you permission to hand gum.
Yes, and so she came and stopped us. Then we were like, oh, you want us to hand it out in like an orderly manner? Oh, okay, like in a way that no one gets hurt. I guess that makes more sense. So that is one of my strongest gum-related memories.
I think everybody has one of these because I asked my roommate, Miriam, who you know.
Yes.
And she immediately said her dad used to get these big buckets of the pink bubble yum type gum, and they would have contests where they would chew like how many pieces can we chew and still blow good bubbles.
Whoa, that sounds fun.
And she said they worked the best once you got all the sugar out of it. Mm-hmm. She had to really chew it for a while.
Interesting.
So I think lots of people have these. My gum related memory is my dad always had big red gum. And so like, and I
is that like a cinnamon one?
That's a cinnamon one. Yes.
Yeah.
And so for like the longest, anytime I was in his car, he doesn't really do this anymore, but he would always have it in there. And so now a lot of the cinnamony smell and me liking cinnamon, it like brings me back to the big red cinnamon gum.
I do love stuff like that. It's one of those things where I feel like we all have those kind of memories of people that we grew up around having something like that, where it's like, oh, I associate this minty flavor or this this kind of gum or whatever. I think it was my grandmother on my mom's side that I associated Altoids with. They kind of seem like an older, more something type of mint. Yeah, doesn't seem as in your face. Just
and one
their
day,
marketing's not like.
If you have grandkids, they're gonna be like, oh, my one granddad always had mints.
But I think the fact that I don't use them a ton and don't chew gum, occasionally I'm like, oh man, but like that's kind of like a cool memory, and also smell is such a powerful like memory thing, so like remembering your dad's specific gum or anyone's grandparent reminds me of that line from, I think we've talked about this exact line before, from Parent Trap, where she's describing about her grandfather to the other one because they're going to switch places, and she's like, he always smells of peppermint and pipe tobacco. Yes. And it's like this combination of, and sort of having like this is the smell associated with me kind of thing. I've always got this kind of mint as my favorite kind. Or I've always got this kind of, I guess you could do that for anything, like a cologne or a type of deodorant or something like that. But it's cool to have those things associated with other people. Yeah. And so I don't know. I guess by not being a gum head, I'm foregoing that. But
you know what? This is a little bit of insight into me and Jam's life outside of the podcast. Mason often roasts coffee, and then we go home. He roasts coffee while we do podcast stuff. And when I go home, he smells like roasting coffee, which is not the same as smelling like coffee. It's different. And so the kids in your world will associate like, oh, that was my grandfather. He always smelled like roasting coffee. Yeah.
Right. So it's probably like, it probably is coffee in every way. It's like either he smelled like roasting coffee or smelled like coffee that he was drinking, know? Yeah. That's probably like the most common aroma associated with me. But that coffee roasting smell is really funny. It's very unique, but Em can sometimes tell. She like gets home or something. She's like, were you roasting coffee earlier? It's just like, it kind of hangs out on you, but it just, it's not bad. It's like a toasty. It's kind of nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's like a kind of warm, toasty smell.
It's like in his hair, he has really thick, luscious locks. And if I like touch his hair or something, it's like, it like wafts out at me, So, all right. And they used to roast while I was asleep, and so Mason would come home and smell like that. It was like a sleepy bedtime smell. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's it. That's our episode on the chemistry of gum. Thanks so much for, coming here with us and learning today.
Thanks for sort of reteaching some of that and expanding it quite a bit. And for explaining the chemistry of that to all of us very every day. If you have a question, an idea, a thought, something very everyday life that you think may be chemistry, please ask us. Go to chemforyourlife.com. That's chemforyourlife.com to share your thoughts and ideas with us. If you'd like to help us keep our show going and contribute to cover the cost of making it, you can join our super cool Chem community of patrons like Julie.
Julie S.
Julie S. Great. I was like, that's the name I have in my head. Hopefully I'm not forgetting that from 40 minutes ago.
Let me just double check on my notes here. Yep, Julie S.
Julie S. You can join that super cool community, support the show, keep it free for everybody else while getting thank yous as our gratitude to you for keeping the show going. We could not keep the show going without you all, so thank you for supporting the show. If you're not able to do that, though, you can still help us by subscribing on our favorite podcast app, rating, writing a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, also subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving a comment over there, asking a question over there, something like that.
Tell us what your favorite gum-related memory is.
Yes. Those things help us to keep the show going, help other people to find the show, and have chemistry as part of their everyday life, too.
This episode of Chemistry for Your Life was created by Melissa Collini, that's me, and Jam Robinson, that's him. I just totally lost my spot. The episode was made possible by our financial supporters on Patreon, like Jam was already talking about. It really is so special to us that you make this show possible and accessible. And so we like to give a shout out every single time. So those members of our community are Chris and Claire S., Hunter R., Katrina H., Lynn S., Scott B., Stephen B., Timothy P., Brian K., Chelsea M., Dorian V., Elizabeth P., Heather R., John T., Jesse R., Latila S., I believe. That's not on here. Rachel R., Autoclave, Avishai B., Chelsea B., Sierra L., Cullen R., Emerson W., Erica B., Jacob T., Jeanette N., Julie S., our newest member, woo! Christina G., Sarah M., Suzanne P., and Venus R. Thank you all so much for everything that you do to make Chem for Your Life happen.
If you'd like to learn more about today's chemistry lesson, you can check out the references for this episode in our show notes or in the description of the video on YouTube.
Yay, chemistry!
Yay, chemistry!
Yay, gum!
Yay, gum!